This is the video for Chapter 14, Section 7, Jackson's Indian Policy. Before we get started, let's go over the lesson essential question. How well did President Andrew Jackson promote democracy? Keep this in mind as we go through the section. Also, keep these three questions in mind as we go over the short video that covers the information for this section. The first question is, why did many whites call the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Seminole groups the five civilized tribes? The second question is, how did the Supreme Court interpret the Indian Removal Act? And the third question, what was the intention of the Indian Removal Act of 1830? Keep these questions in mind.
Jackson was determined to change Washington and America, and he did so with lightning speed.
The first major piece of legislation that he recommended and got passed was the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
This act empowered Jackson to forcibly evict all the Indian tribes living east of the Mississippi River. 5 Indian nations were directly affected. Of the 5, the Cherokee tribe, located in Georgia, chose to fight the eviction in a surprising way.
Instead of going on the warpath the way their fathers and grandfathers might have done, this generation of Cherokee Indians took Georgia to court.
The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In an historic decision, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in favor of the Cherokee, saying they did not have to move. But Andrew Jackson thought differently.
Jackson said of Marshall, he made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
The result was that they were rounded up at gunpoint and forced to move. The property was seized, and they were forced west. Of course, on the Cherokees' forced march, about 1 out of every 4 Cherokees died en route, which is why they call it the Trail of Tears.
It is, without a doubt, the most controversial decision Jackson would make in his career, and is one of the saddest chapters in American history.
Now that you've watched the video, let's go over the review questions. Question 1. Why did many whites call the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Seminole groups the 5 civilized tribes? Most of the eastern Indians lived in the South. They belonged to one of these 5 groups. Hoping to remain in their homelands, these Indians had adopted many white ways. Most had given up hunting and become farmers. Many had learned to read and write. The Cherokee had their own written language, a newspaper, and a constitution modeled on the U.S. Constitution. That is why the whites called these Indians the 5 civilized tribes. The second question, how did the Supreme Court interpret the Indian Removal Act? Well, as you saw in the video, the Supreme Court had ruled that the tribes could remain on their lands. But Andrew Jackson decided to go against what the Supreme Court had said and remove them anyways. The third question, what was the intention of the Indian Removal Act of 1830? After watching the video, you should now realize that the intention of the Indian Removal Act was to remove all Indians by military force to Western territories. Now that you've gone over this section, I want you to look at the 2 questions in your interactive notebook. Go over these questions and answer them, and when you are done, go back and look at the scale for this section. Please reassess where you are on the scale and put today's date to mark where you are on the scale.